Evolutionary anthems. The songs of Darwin finches might be responsible for the group rapid speciation. From Natural History, October 2003, authored by Adam Summers. On Santa Cruz Island, in the eastern Pacific Ocean, the morning sounds of songbirds foraging and courting are reassuringly familiar in an otherwise outlandish landscape of the Galapagos Islands. The dry washes here partly concealed tortoises the sizes of refrigerators, iguanas as long as your arm sprawl in the baking sun. Darwin's finches, one of the best studied examples of rapid speciation, are the source of the early morning's whistles and trills. But the birds are far more than mere pleasant diversions that remind homesick biologists of their own territorial origins. Rather, already famous as the subjects of long-term studies on feeding adaptations and the origin of species, the birds are proving to biomechanists that their calls represent a mechanical link between foraging abilities and song production. The co-variation of song and beak size may have been the driving force behind the rapid evolutionary development of finch species in the small island chain, a process that took less than 3 million years. Speciation, how one species gives rise to another, is easiest to grasp from populations that become isolated. Imagine that an earthquake upends enough rock to create rapids in a formerly sluggish stream, a common event in South America. The new stretch of rapids could keep fish upstream of the rocks from mating with their downstream counterparts. Inevitably, over the generations, the two groups will have to contend with differences between the two habitats, whether in dissolved oxygen levels, water temperature, food availability, or the presence of parasites. Those selection pressures, as well as the simple accumulation of diverse mutations, may be enough to genetically isolate the upstream from the downstream population. Speciation without physical separation, however, is a trickier concept. Species arising by such a process are known as sympatric, a term whose Greek roots mean of the same country. The finches of the Galapagos Island are a textbook example of sympatric speciation. One common ancestor gave rise to 14 distinct species, even though members of the ancestral population were within easy flight of one another. In other words, even though there was no geographical barrier to interbreeding. 30 years of fieldwork, molecular biology research, and morphological study have led to a good understanding of the evolutionary history of Darwin's finches, particularly the link between their food habits and the shapes of their beaks. Today's birds descend from a generalist ancestral finch that invaded the islands from mainland Ecuador. Galapagos species now inhabit a variety of ecological niches, and each species has a beak suited to find food in its niche. Insect-eating species, for example, have narrow, warbler-style beaks, useful for nabbing insects from leaves and bark. Seed eaters have robust bills, tough enough and strong enough to crack the hard seeds they favor. Now the variations among Darwin's finches have enabled Jeffrey Podos, a behavioral ecologist at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst, and colleagues at Duke University, to prove that a bird's beak is as vital to its song as it is to its supper. The clear tones of birdsong emerge from internal air sacs that can inflate and deflate, much like a bagpipe's bladder. Muscles surrounding the sacs force air through a part of the bird's respiratory tract called the syrinx, a thin-walled region of muscle and cartilage, roughly analogous to human vocal cords. As it passes through the syrinx, air vibrates at several dominant frequencies and many overtones, blatting as though it were blown through the mouthpiece of a trumpet. And just as in a trumpet, the tone of the sound is profoundly affected by the length and shape of the resonating chamber downstream of the original vibrations. In the bird's case, The vocal tract acts as a long, fleshy resonating chamber, dampening out many of the overtones. By rapidly opening and closing its beak, a bird can alter the damping characteristics of the vocal tract. Podos and his colleagues demonstrated in the lab that when sparrows sing, their beaks partly determine the tone of their call. The slower the beaks move, the simpler is the melody of the call, both in tonal range and rhythm. The next step is to study birdsong in the field, focusing on several species of closely related birds with varying beak shapes and sizes. Mechanical systems usually have to sacrifice force for speed. That constraint is particularly telling in biological mechanical systems, where, for instance, jaws that can move rapidly can't close with a lot of force. Podos realized that among Darwin's finches, the varieties of this trade-off and the natural variability of beak shape could enable him to test whether a bird's song could indicate the bird's ability to eat hard seeds. With Joel Southall, also at the University of Massachusetts, and Marcos R. Rosi Santos of Projeto Baile Jabarte in Caravelas, Brazil, Podos filmed the calls of 7 species of Galapagos finches. The birds ranged from the warbler finch, with a pointy, narrow beak, to the large ground finch, with a broad, heavy bill. The results meshed well with the laboratory data. The heavy-billed birds had a simpler call, presumably because the bill, more suited to closing forcefully on tough seeds, was not able to move as rapidly as the more delicate beak of the insect eaters. One of the chief roles of the calls among songbirds is to find mates, and that takes me back to the topic of sympatric speciation. When that first population of generalist finches invaded the Galapagos, natural variation in beak size among individuals would have made the tougher seeds an accessible food item for some of the animals, but not for others. Because song pitch and beak strength are interrelated, those birds would also have sung a slightly simpler, deeper song than their smaller beaked brethren. Many female birds prefer males with a familiar call, their own, and so heavy-beaked females would prefer the song of heavy-beaked males. The link between song and food could thereby lead to a segregated mating within a population, even though all the individuals in the population could freely mix. Ah, the sweet sound of evolution in action. Thank you.